Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dominic Sims, and I'm a member of the NIMS Board of Directors, as well as Chuck, the president of the NIMS Board. Thank you for being here, Chuck. So today, we're going to talk a little bit about designing for outcomes, performance-based codes and standards. And perhaps if you've been here for the last day and a half, you've heard a little bit about AI and how AI is beginning to have an impact on the building industry. And you've heard about off-site construction. Well, what our panel is going to talk about today is the role of codes and standards, and specifically how prescriptive codes could be somewhat limiting, but performance codes could free up designers and contractors and owners to explore new possibilities, and at the same time provide infrastructure and buildings that are more resilient to man-made and natural disasters. So our objectives are sort of to help you understand a little bit more about the principles and benefits of performance-based codes versus prescriptive codes. To talk a little bit about the basis of performance codes and identify methods of verification, because as we all know, without being able to verify the objective and the results, you run into trouble. So we have a panel here today of three individuals that I have known for a while, and I can assure you know deeply the value of performance code. Scott, Hugo, and John are each going to talk a little bit about themselves, and then we'll get into a few questions to kick things off.
Great. Okay. I'm John Hooper, as it sees on the slide. I'm a director of earthquake engineering and a senior principal at Magnuson Associates in Seattle. Real quick, we're doing performance-based seismic design for 25 years. My other role in my life is I've been involved in the development of provisions, standards, and codes for over 35 years. And I'm currently the chair of the BSSC NEHRP Provisions Update Committee that is finalizing the 2026 NEHRP seismic provisions.
Hello, Scott Adams. I'm with the International Code Council, a fire protection engineer. And one of my responsibilities there is I'm also the secretariat for the International Performance Code, which we're currently going through and revamping, for a better name, modernizing in that. And it's been kind of interesting because before I was the fire marshal in Park City, Utah, and also on the original scoping committee for the Performance Code. So I've been involved with it for quite a while. So happy to be here with you today.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Hugo Aguilar. I'm the Senior VP of Codes and Standards for IAMO. I've been writing codes and standards for about 15 years now, performance-based, some are prescriptive-based. We'll talk a little bit about that later on, but currently I oversee the codes and standards for IAMO. I'm also the chair of not the chair, but I'm a member of the Board of Standards Review for ANSI. I'm the vice chair for the Standards Council of Canada. So I've been writing standards for quite a bit, so I'm looking forward to the conversation, and thank you all.
Thank you, gentlemen. So before we get started, just a show of hands. How many of you are familiar with performance codes? Okay, well, good.
So we're done here.
Well, the first thing we were going to do, I was going to ask the panel to talk just a little bit about, to kind of level set, high level, the difference between performance and prescriptive requirements. John, sorry.
I'm happy to. Like I mentioned, we've been doing performance-based seismic design for 25 years. And the difference between that, and that's not done in every project, it's very selective. And so we do a lot of prescriptive design. That's probably 95% of what we do. And then simply put, performance, you've set a target. You want to achieve this performance, and for seismic, it's low likelihood of collapse and all the work that goes with it, or you follow the rules, the step-by-step process. And in this case, the IBC, which jurisdiction over most of the country, adopts ASCE 7, the low standard, and within that is prescriptive requirements in the world of seismic design. You follow it step by step by step. In doing that prescriptive design, you achieve what the code intends, hopefully is the outcome, but you never actually check it. In the performance-based design world, you actually check to confirm you've achieved that target directly. And there's a big difference between the two.
Scott?
Yeah, I kind of coming from the code side of it. So as we know, the prescriptive is more going to tell you how to build, like the building code and the fire code do, where the performance-based is going to specify what the outcome is that you want to achieve, as John has reiterated. And as you kind of go through the process, and again, no bias, I think it's a much better process because now you have the chance to actually demonstrate what you want to achieve. Some examples, we probably used a lot of it as alternative means and methods requests, which again is a performance-based type approach. In some instances, maybe for those who have been involved with it, we saw a lot of fire modeling based upon what the outcome is going to be, or smoke management. We want to increase travel distances and things like that. So probably, again, as John is the biggest part is the verification method. So whatever's being presented, now that design team has to be able to justify that or prove it, which then also gets passed on down to the inspections. So again, how to inspect that, and then finally how the occupancy, how the certificate of occupancy is going to be issued. So, it's a great approach. It gives a lot of flexibility, but also, like we were talking too, a little bit of maybe more costly up front, but again, the overall benefit of the performance after of the building as such. We do see this used a lot over in our European countries. Again, they're going more towards that. So, sorry to be too long.
That's great.
Yeah, so similar to Scott, I look at it from the code and standards perspective. The way I define performance codes, it's providing a desired outcome, but leaving the means of achieving that outcome to the discretion of the regulated entity. That is simply what a performance requirement is. Prescriptive is, it gives you the means to achieve the outcome. That's essentially the two main differences. One tells you what the outcome is, but it gives the regulated entity the flexibility to determine what means to take in order to achieve that outcome. So yeah, that's about it. So that's straightforward how I look at the differences between those two. We'll get into more detail later, but after share, that's what it is.
Well, let's do this. Let's pull this apart just a little bit, and then jump in. Whoever wants to answer first. But could you compare, maybe contrast, the advantages and the disadvantages to both performance and prescriptive?
Mike?
I can start with the advantages. Now, for performance-based, when it comes to the advantages, there's one common denominator that I see, and that's the flexibility. Because of the flexibility one has to comply with the requirement, it can lead to a cost-effective way to achieving that outcome. So that's one advantage. It leads to a cost-effective way to achieve the outcome. Two, believe it or not, it can improve the performance of the regulated entity. It improves their behavior, it improves their performance. Now, because they have the flexibility to choose between multiple means, now they'll research the topic, they'll look into the intent, and therefore it improves their performance. And thirdly, and I think this is it's going to be one of the buzzwords of the day, it leads to innovative solutions. Because of the multiple flexibilities you have, naturally, one is going to look into the most cost-effective means to achieve the desired outcome, and due to that, they look into innovative ways. So innovation is a result of performance requirements, and that's an advantage that we have. And I'll let some of my co-panelists maybe dive more into that, maybe look into the negatives of performance.
No, I'm going to say, just kind of following up with that too, kind of back with the balancing act, because now you're looking at, balancing the safety and the cost, and then also the regulatory compliance. So again, working with that path. Now, the nice thing about this too, again, coming back from from a code official point of view, is now the design team, whatever they provide to me, they have to support that, whether through modeling or such like that. Now, we've already seen this a lot with the seismic requirements, because that's been around for a while with how to model it. Also, we're looking now more as for fire hazards, modeling what could be the potential fire growth, or how do I contain that. We've probably seen a lot of these, again, going back with alternative methods, like for increasing travel distances. So again, we've used those type of approaches to say, okay, this is how much smoke is going to be generated. We've done our egress time analysis and things like that to be able to show that based upon this design, it's going to support that. So, yeah, kind of that way.
Before I answer the question, how many designers are in the room besides me? I'm talking, oh, they're talking good. The rest of you, I can say whatever I want, and you won't disagree, right?
Well.
You can leave now. Well, the advantage we've already hit upon, it provides that flexibility to the engineer and our client, the owner, in providing a different solution that's not allowed with a prescriptive approach. That's fundamentally, 25 years ago, why we said, let's do seismic different, and we would argue better. Because prescriptive requirements, you can't do everything you want to do, and so we was able to achieve outcomes that we have to test with modeling, as you described, get approval by the jurisdiction, be peer reviewed by our colleagues that make it really hard to get that approval. But we actually end up saving our owner money. The only reason seismic design is done in the performance world, especially for my favorite project, for my high rises, right, is because it saves the owners millions of dollars. And we believe the outcomes are better. The disadvantage of the challenges is you've got to make sure that you can demonstrate to the jurisdiction, to their agreement, that you've met that outcome. And so some jurisdictions, when we first started, they said, no, not in my backyard, because I don't know how to assess that result. Over time, the seismic world has accepted, especially in a high seismic area like the West Coast, Utah, you from there, and other jurisdictions. So we've really come a long ways there. Our firm is trying to do the same thing with wind. And the key point there is some jurisdictions are okay with that, but other jurisdictions, because it's new, they said not in my backyard again. So there's always a learning curve with this alternative means and methods, Scott, you described. That's the vehicle we can use today. I want a performance code that makes it even easier, but that's the disadvantage. Jurisdictions kind of not be willing to accept that approach in their jurisdiction.
Well, let's stick with you for a minute, John, because I know you have considerable experience in seismic design. So how do performance codes enhance your ability as a designer to design buildings that are more resilient to seismic loads?
Well, I think Scott talked about it, and sort of Hugo, about if they identify the performance metrics or the goals in the performance code and don't tell the how, but what is the target, it becomes the compliance path is easier because it's in a building code. Some jurisdictions don't like to do alternative means and methods. It just it's harder for them to accept that. So having a performance code that opens that opportunity, then more jurisdictions, I think, would be willing to accept it because that path is right before them.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, also adding to that, one of the big challenges has been, as John has brought up, is being having the, I want to say this the right way, is that code officials are sometimes hesitant because they don't have that expertise and something new is coming in. So that's why the peer review is very important, and the codes address that as an alternative. The other big player in this too is that the stakeholder is going to be the owner. And like how John and Hugo both explained, that they need to understand that, because not only once you get your certificate of occupancy, now you have your ongoing operations and maintenance of it, which again is a much better design, because those are built into the design, and these are the things that they're going to have to do as part of that building. And again, that cost savings, because now they've already looked at that. Whereas, if I had to just put in a regular, separating certain occupancies, this is what the code says, this is what the hour rating has to be. But with the design approach, I can look, okay, this is a higher fire load over here versus a lower fire load, so maybe I don't need to have such, the more prescriptive type approach. I have a little more flexibility with that. So again, those are those different parameters that the designer and the owner can take into account when they do those types of things.
Therefore, you're putting the money where it's most valuable. You described the fire scenario. For earthquake, we want to put the cost of the seismic system where it's going to do the most good and provide the best value to the outcome.
Yeah, so to add to the disadvantages of performance codes or performance requirements, I talked a little bit being more cost effective if performance codes are. But at the same time, the disadvantages is if it costs more. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I'll give you an example. Say you have a regulation that it's performance based. You get the flexibility to determine a means to comply with that regulation. So someone chooses a means and costs X number of dollars. When it comes to administration costs, continuous monitoring, everything that's involved regarding that specific regulation. Now, the disadvantages are, what if someone were to choose a means that would have been more expensive if it would have been a prescriptive requirement, all right? If you have a prescriptive requirement, it tells you it needs to be X, Y, and Z. So you meet X, Y, and Z, it costs, you know how much it's gonna cost. But if you're giving the regulations and you're giving the flexibility to choose a specific means, it ends up being more expensive than it would have been if you would have just followed a prescriptive requirement. So that's a disadvantage. If you don't know what you're doing, if you haven't been around long enough, there's a potential that you're gonna choose a path that is actually more costly. Another disadvantage is that there could be some unintended consequences. And I'll give you an example of that. I know it's not related to buildings, but let's say a medicine bottle, right? The Consumer Product Safety Commission requires a medicine bottle to be child resistant. And according to the performance requirements, 85% of the time, you need to prove that a child cannot open it, or right? So what ends up happening now is you have this product now out there, the manufacturer is so well that now adults can't open it. So, right? So what's happening now is they either have closed or they don't close it at all, and they potentially can lead to a catastrophic event. So those are some unintended consequences, but when you look at the overall scheme of things, nothing tops a performance requirement.
I want to add to that, when we started the performance-based seismic design, before we actually offered it to a client, we tested it internally numerous times so we did dual designs, both prescriptive and performance, to show and prove to ourselves that the outcome would be positive, so we didn't have that disadvantage of providing something to an owner that costed more money, unless they were trying to do enhanced performance targets. But if you're trying to be just equivalent to the code, we had to prove to ourselves, because if you don't do that, that client will never come back to you to do performance thing, because they just won't. They're there, they want good performance, but at an equal or lesser cost.
So, well, I mean, this all sounds pretty good, right? Considering that, what are some of the principal reasons why performance codes, one, have taken so long to take off, and two, what are some of the reasons why they're not more widely used?
Well, just kind of quickly, probably one of the bigger challenges, not knowing how to apply it correctly. And so the design teams and that are a little hesitant. Whereas if I can just go to the code and know, okay, I need to do this and this and this, a lot easier to approach it, like Hugo kind of mentioned. One of the other things too is, again, the feeling comfortable with being able to do that, not only that design, but also that review, or having the staff to do it. And lots of times it's those, usually the ones we see mostly now are those unique projects, like maybe a big facility or warehouse manufacturing that maybe deal with hazardous materials or things like that, because they are very complicated processes. So again, a lot going on to that, as opposed to maybe something just as simple like we're seeing now with the wildland fires. We're starting to see more and more modeling coming available for that, which again is now telling us, okay, maybe this type of a resilient type of a product is going to be appropriate for the house, and those types of things, or maybe this is how we need to model our defensible space based upon the vegetation. So those are some of the ways I see them starting to be used more that way, and some of the advantages that way.
Yeah, so in my ecosystem, I deal mainly with plumbing and mechanical codes. When it comes to performance requirements being embraced, we don't run into that issue, which is a blessing. But I try to think of reasons why is it sometimes so difficult to embrace a performance requirement. Competency, like you mentioned, that's a big one. If you're not competent enough, how are you gonna know the solution? If you're given a whiteboard to determine a solution, I think you'll feel more comfortable knowing what that solution is. A lot of jurisdictions are wearing multiple hats. They're doing plumbing inspection, doing mechanical inspection, electrical inspections. So the competency level is not there. So a lot of folks probably prefer prescriptive requirements, and that's probably a reason why I think it hasn't been embraced a little bit more.
I'll let you know how seismic has evolved to be just a one firm scenario. And that is, after several years of doing the processes and being peer reviewed by some great engineers up and down the West Coast, we all decided the best route forward for this is to provide a guideline. Put together best practices, because the seismic world is highly, highly technical. Lots of detailed modeling, all of this non-linear stuff that you don't know anything about, but we do. We want to write it down so that that price of entry came down, because most engineers are smart enough, they just know how to get started. And so we put together that in about 2010, and it's been evolving since then. It's not a prescriptive approach, it gets close to that actually, but it does get any engineer that really wants to dive into it, the information to do so. And in the wind world, the performance-based wind world, we actually created through ASCE a pre-standard, which is nothing more than a guideline, to do the same thing, to allow engineers to be able to start the process with enough information so that they will be successful. If we didn't have those documents out there helping guide us, it wouldn't be as widespread, at least in the seismic world, as it is today, because any firm that is good at seismic design prescriptively, in my humble opinion, could do it performance-based.
So I'm kind of curious, you talked about roadblocks, what's holding it back. Do those roadblocks exist in both commercial markets and residential markets, or is it more prevalent in one versus another?
I would say, I think probably more so in the commercial, because we haven't seen it that much in the residential yet, maybe other than maybe major hotels or layouts like that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and probably one of the other challenges with that too is developing, like John has brought up, is having the standards out there or guidelines to follow. So again, we're inventing those, I shouldn't say inventing, but developing those more.
You're right.
Because we have what's deemed to satisfy, right? And then the other thing is, as we kind of go internationally, in the U.S., as we're starting to perform, do the international performance code, we use a lot of the American standards. Are those going to be applicable internationally? And so are the international standards going to be applicable in the U.S.? So that's one of the other things too with that. So
I'll jump in the world that the seismic, it's really a high-rise driven thing by and large, because that's where it pays for itself. The other occupancy type we use is hospitals, especially in the state of California. And that whole process it should have, if it does not every project, a performance target with all the high-end modeling, et cetera, because they're such an important aspect of what we need after a major event. Emergency operation centers would be the same. Any essential type facility, those are the other types would benefit. May not save any money in its construction, but you'll have a better idea of its outcome, which is really important.
Yeah, I would concur that you see roadblocks more prevalent in the commercial space. And I think a big reason is because of cost. If you were to compare a prescriptive requirement with a performance requirement, they both have the same social benefit, right? They're both gonna benefit from those requirements. That essentially stays constant. But then you got the other two factors, which is the social cost and the government cost. The social cost is the regulated entity. What changes do they need to make to comply with that requirement? What kind of education do they need? As far as the governmental costs, the inspection costs, the continuous compliance costs, all that stuff that comes into play when you're enforcing a regulation, there's a cost to it. So if I were to think of a roadblock, it falls into one of those two factors, because the social benefit is there. They're both gonna benefit regardless if you have a performance requirement or a prescriptive, where it comes down to what's gonna be the social cost and what's gonna be the cost to enforce that requirement.
Let's talk a little bit, since you mentioned governmental cost. Let's talk a little bit about compliance, right? Because, at the end of the day, most buildings that are constructed, when they're finished, they need to get a CO. So what are some of the acceptable methods of proving compliance when you're using a performance path?
When it comes to acceptable methods, it's up to the authority having jurisdiction. If you're given a blank slate on what option to take, what other means you can take, it's pretty much an open canvas as long as the performance objective is met. But there's the alternate means that was mentioned, and that is an acceptable path. If you can show through third-party testing and engineering calculations and methods that this alternate methods meets the performance outcome, then that is an acceptable path for most jurisdictions.
And just to kind of go with that, the codes are always going to be what we say deemed dissatisfied. So the baseline is always going to be what the building code or the fire code sets. And so again, we want to achieve that. So a good example is like how we have the energy storage systems now, as we're starting to do more and more with data centers. Well, we get to the fire sprinkler design. We just can't go to NFPA 13, which is the fire sprinkler guide, and say, oh, this is what it's going to be. It's going to be based upon now individual cases and engineering judgment based upon full-scale fire testing. So that's how it has to be done. So kind of coming back from that, now following up what Hugo said, now I have to actually prove what I'm going to do. How am I going to prove that? Well, it's either going to be through the modeling or the testing. And then after that, so as a result of that, now whatever those results of that testing or the modeling were, that's now how it has to be built. Now, maybe that jurisdiction doesn't have the expertise to make sure they inspect it. So again, falling back to a special inspector or a third party to do that, to ensure that those design parameters that they have set, goals and objectives, are being met.
I'm a seismic guy, I'm sorry, I'll use that as my example.
We'll forgive you.
Yeah, please do. At the beginning of all the seismic world, the jurisdictions are made up, that we building officials said are smart people. But this was a level that they weren't really ready for and be able to have the staff to really do on their own. And so the peer review process is what we've been doing, and that is the group that provides a very detailed review over the entire design process that interrogates what we do, and I have scars to show it, that the jurisdiction relies on. The jurisdiction understands it. They have people there that can understand what's going on, but they actually don't perform that technical review. And so that's how it's being done. And that took time for all the jurisdictions that deal with high seismic and high-rise design, for which, again, seismic performance-based design is really geared towards. Juxtapose that, I mentioned earlier, we're trying to do the same thing with wind, the wind engineering. They're not there yet. They're at the very beginning of where we were 25 years ago for seismic. And so they have to start getting comfortable initially, and then the same framework is there. They just have to embrace it. It's just a different world. It's not California and the West Coast. It's a Gulf Coast, right? That's where the wind is, and that's where you can save money by that. And they're just not ready to accept it as easily because it's at the beginning.
John, drill down, walk us through a typical peer review process, the nuts and bolts. How's it work?
Okay, so we go to the jurisdiction saying we want to do performance-based design, and they say, great. And what they've done over time is they've created a group of peer reviewers that are deemed acceptable to the jurisdiction, and they will pick those individuals that will peer review us. It used to be I could pick my own peer reviewer. I really like that. But there's a conflict in there, as we can very well say. So they do that, and you set it up, and you're working with that peer review team. There's anywhere between 2 and 4 people. It varies by jurisdiction. And while we go through our design, we send them our information on a kind of every couple of months, and they review it and come back with comments, back and forth. And then at the end, they have to sign a letter that says that we meet the equivalent design that would be done prescriptively by the code. You have to write that letter. In the process of doing that, we go through 500 detailed comments from that peer review team. So you talk about the cost of doing a peer review, it's much higher than a prescriptive design based upon that level of interrogation. I'll use that word on purpose. the outcome is better because our designs are almost always improved by the peer review process. And so, but again, we wouldn't be doing this without understanding the outcome is being targeted, but we save the owner money, because why would he or she do that if they can't save money? Unless you're a hospital, again, like I mentioned earlier, that really wants to understand their performance, and I've designed hospitals performance-based, where the cost was actually a little bit more, but they were okay because their target and their performance, they're at a higher level than a commercial project or a residential project, at least in today's world. And we may or may not get the functional recovery. Let me know when you want me to talk about.
Sure, no, go for it.
There's a new performance target that is being talked about for decades now, but it's actually coming into fruition for the building environment, called functional recovery. You heard it throughout the last day and a half. We're targeting how much time it takes to get back to your building after a seismic event. We define what that is. And so that you can, depending on what your occupancy is, you can say, I want to be out for only 1 day, or 1 month, or 6 months, and you can target what you want to achieve. The jurisdiction can take this framework and assign different project occupancy types to different categories, because of that area wants to say, I want my hospitals to be 1 day. Well, everyone wants that. But what about a bowling alley? Do we care about that? Probably not, but you can assign different categories of performance. So we have the technology to do that. That information, that framework is being published in the 2026 NEHR provisions as an appendix. It's voluntary. We took that appendix, and it's done in my world that I've been overseeing for the last 4 years. That gets sent over the standards process to ASCE 7. They're promulgating it right now. They're voting on, the votes just came in on Tuesday. It'll take another year to see if it can pass that, but it'll allow us. We have a life safety approach. That's what the code has been for a long time, forever. Now we can have a functional recovery target that we can target how much time I could be out of my building given a certain earthquake size. That's a brand new performance target that's new to the world that, in my world, that we designed for.
And again, say also adding to that too, I forgot to mention it, but it's also, so the part of recovery is the fire.
Yeah.
So again, the impact that the fire is going to have, are they able to come back? Do we need to reinforce the design? Things like that. And also with flooding, that's one thing that's been hitting a lot now too. Building in for that 500-year flood, which still surprises me for a country 250 years old, we're looking at a 500-year flood.
We haven't had that longer enough. Trust me, Scott, we can do better.
But yes, the recovery is becoming very important, building in those redundant systems and things like that.
No, I agree. Alternative methods can be costly, but sometimes they're necessary. They're necessary. You may have a particular installation where the required performance requirement cannot be met because of your situation. It could be that your building design is different. That's where you go through the alternative means, and you got to prove through simulations, engineering designs, and so forth, in order to meet that regulation. That takes time, effort, and of course, cost.
Yeah, and just quickly to add to that too, we do see those stumbling blocks that happen, but then again, you go back to the prescriptive, and that's how we even solve it, even though all the other components still follow the performance-based approach.
That's a fantastic point.
Well, in terms of proof, several of you mentioned, testing and obviously modeling, right? Tell me what's the prevalence of testing and especially full-scale testing, which I would imagine is expensive. But what percentage of projects that are done through a performance approach employ either testing or modeling, or both?
For us, it's twofold. We model things in the computer, sophisticated modeling, so that's really important. But the components that we put in the model are based upon full-scale testing in the research laboratories across the United States. Whether it's at Berkeley or Stanford or Lehigh, whatever, a lot of the components have been tested full scale so that we have more confidence that our model is giving us the results that will be actualized in the event of an earthquake. So without the testing that we can feel good about that information, we'd be guessing more than we We kind of are, but we feel much more comfortable based upon that. That was really an important outcome that's taken 25 years to get to, but we're still improving that.
And the same thing on the fire side too, as again, all the products going through the calorimeter test, the heat output, the smoke development. So now again, we can model that. So again, how is that, as we say, fire load, how is that going to impact the structural members? And so again, the fireproofing that we would look there. Whereas, you know, as you follow the building code tables, you know, based upon the construction type you choose, this is what your rating has to be. Well, does that really match up with the fire loading? So again, a different approach, which kind of again comes back to the recovery. So again, I have strengthened that building structure skeleton to withstand those, or at least be able to come back from it.
Yeah, so I'm in the codes development, standards development side. For Standards Council of Canada, for example, they require your standards to be written in performance-based. So whatever requirements you put in within that product standard needs to be tested and verified, you know, through performance requirements. So the proof needs to be within the provisions. Now, once the code is published, the standard is published, the proof now falls into the regulated entity that they meet that requirement. I'll give you an example. I was reading a story about the Luxor building in Clark County, Canada. The pyramid shape and the large interior atrium did not allow them to meet the ventilation or smoke requirement as required by the county. So, you know, but the code has a performance outcome. So it fell on the regulated entity to show that this alternative method and design meets that performance outcome. So they had to do it through simulations and designs and paperwork and submit all this proof to show to the AHJ that you can actually meet the regulated performance requirements. So the proof falls on, at the end of the day, the burden of proof ultimately falls onto the regulated entity to show that they meet the requirements.
One of the things that on our panel, we had a pre-call, and John talked about, well, you know, this is nothing new. We've been doing this for 25 years.
Yeah, get with it, people, come on.
But something must be changing because we're seeing greater uptake of performance codes. What is changing, and what are some of the roadblocks or tools that are being put in place that will accelerate the use of performance codes?
I'll jump in first because I'll wear my standards hat for the first time. I'm involved with ASCE and SEI standards development for a long, long time. I'm on a committee for performance-based design. And we have a committee that's trying to develop pre-standards or guidelines for seismic, wind, flood, and fire. Give that guideline, give that information to the community, the design community, so that we can try to achieve the performance outcomes and open up and be more creative, like we've been talking about, given that. How quickly we can wrap that up, 1, 3, 5, 6 years or not, but that's happening out there. And the roadblock is simply getting it done. And once it's done, will jurisdictions allow it to be used as written?
So, you know, the acceptance of performance requirements has grown over the years. And I think it goes even further back than 20 years. You know, I can think of the administration, for example. In 1993, President Bill Clinton indicated through his department that they should embrace performance requirements rather than telling regulated entities on how to behave and how to meet the requirements. And 10 years later, President President Bush also indicated that performance regulations should be used. The reason because of flexibility. It gives a regulated entity the flexibility to meet the mandated requirement in the most cost-efficient manner. And then you go to Obama. He had an executive order that essentially rectified what President Clinton said with the emphasis on flexibility. When you think about it globally, the World Trade Organization embraces performance requirements in the Article 2.8. in here in the U.S., you got a joint agreement between Canada, the U.S., and Mexico that you need to promote performance requirements. In the codes and standards, you tell your committee, embrace performance requirements because of the flexibility it provides. So little by little, it's catching fire and it's catching steam. The word is getting out, and I think through all these various sectors of the industry, slowly but surely, everyone I think is going to become aware of the advantages of performance requirements.
And I think just to add to that too, we're seeing more of the jurisdictions adopting the performance-based codes. And again, kind of first of all, because it was used as an alternative means and method, so kind of giving them the basis of how to evaluate that. But you think back too, like with the federal government, with the nuclear facilities, they have a performance-based approach, and starting to see more with the mass transit, again, with their facilities, especially the tunnels and the stations and that, following more of a performance-based type approach of how to remove smoke, egress, and strengthening and such of the systems that way. So again, it's kind of always been out there. We just haven't really necessarily called it the performance-based approach. We've always still had the goals and objectives, but now we're kind of getting a better framework for it.
So Scott, you're saying that you are starting to see more jurisdictions adopt the performance code?
Yes, so with actually adopting the performance code to enhance that design, or at least a framework to follow if they want to submit those alternative designs. So yes, this is addressing that for the methods and approach.
Someone told me about, California passed AB 130, which limits a jurisdiction's ability to amend the code for a significant period of time, right? So how does that square with, encouraging jurisdictions to move to a performance code?
Yeah, of course, we, talk about roadblocks. Admittedly, I'm not a huge expert on assembly bills. That's more the GR department, but from my understanding, from AB 130, yes, it does provide this huge roadblock where you cannot amend the requirements within a certain period of time. But it does provide some flexibilities you can use, right? You can incorporate a requirement that it's not more stringent. So you can make an amendment that is performance as long as it's not more stringent. And then one of the other requirements that it has, that I believe that the California Building Standards Commission can amend it as long as it relates to health and safety. So there are some, exceptions to that rule, if you will. Of course, you got to go through the ASJ and get approval and all that stuff. So yes, that can probably impede the advancement of performance requirements, but there are some avenues you can take with the hopes to amending the code so that performance requirements can be implemented.
And I guess especially add too, as new materials come out, that's another big one, because as we know, right now we're developing the codes for the 27th edition. And again, in there's a lot of new products and new technologies that are going into it. But again, the jurisdictions would have to adopt that, so they could be 3 years behind that, or the performance space, they can bring in these new materials, new methods, new designs, things like that.
So we're getting we're getting to the point where we're going to open up for some audience questions. But before we do that, tell me something significant that communities can do, or that the industry can do, to encourage the adoption or use and application of performance codes.
Well, the industry first needs to be involved. A lot of these ecosystems that we are involved in, it's pretty close to a tight-knit community. We got to get the consumers involved. We got to get the engineers involved. We got to get the installer and the maintainers involved, as well as labor and authority having jurisdiction. They all need to be involved in the process and be educated to the advantages of having performance requirements. Because unless you're involved, unless you do this on a daily basis, it's just a different language to you, right? It's just jargon. So the industry needs to be involved. And I think that's the best way to advance the use and acceptance of performance-based requirements.
Kind of this week, we've learned about the 3 Ps, right? Public-private partnerships. So kind of the same thing, getting that involved. Now, the big thing is with industry, they have, so many new things coming out that's going to enhance us a lot. But how do we get that out to let everybody know about it? And so by having that and implementing them in, saying, okay, this is our objective. So, okay, this is how we can meet that, or how we can assist you to meet that. So bringing them to the table as part of those stakeholders, coming to the table to help bring that. And again, that's what's so interesting. When you put together this whole team for a performance-based approach, they're one of those important stakeholders that can be contributed to that. And again, informing the public or saying, you know what, we see how this type of material might withstand more of a wildland fire, or the building design withstand these. Why can't I have that on my home? Well, because the codes don't require. Well, why not? Why can't I have that performance type of objective? So.
I'll close with this comment. We, in the industry, the professional design community that designs initially, we the early adopters of the performance approach. We have it for seismic, we have it for wind, we have it for fire, and we're starting for flood. We need those engineers to have the technology to do that. We then need to bring the jurisdiction up to speed about that this is okay, because we need to gain their trust. We need to educate them that this is going to provide an outcome that is good for everybody. And so, that's what we've seen in development so far. It's come from the technical side and then brought back over into the jurisdiction to show them that this is good.
I have a note here. It says, Dom, if no one mentions AI, ask him. So. Well, go ahead. Why don't you start it?
Here. Come on.
You started it.
Well, I guess it's sort of a two-part question. One is just, how are you seeing AI come into this field? And also, I guess the other part I really wanted to talk about that I think you mentioned a little bit more than the others is just, the beyond the design phase and the plan review phase, that ecosystem, and how unique is it? Like the contractors who work on your projects, is it a very small set, or to do resilience at scale, we have to build that infrastructure for people to actually be able to do it. And I think that's where the prescriptive, to some extent, is like the default, right? You learn it, it's in the code. So I guess it's a two-part question. Can AI improve that? Or are there other ways in which AI is enhancing the entire process?
Well, I'm going to jump first, because the big thing I see is the documentation, is being able to go out there and find what are applicable documents to help support my design or my objectives and my goals, to help that, or at least start steering me that way, because that's probably one of the biggest challenges, is the deemed dissatisfied. So.
Yeah, I haven't exactly played with it, but I can see it happening, right? Because if AI, what it essentially uses is it's a language that it uses in the back end, right? An LLM. So if you teach it to learn performance requirements, you can actually do that. Yeah, I mean, I tested it with other stuff that's not related to performance requirements, so it can work, AI. If you teach the AI to recognize performance requirements and have it compared to a code proposal that's been submitted, and have AI to tell you, is this performance enough, right, or not? Believe it or not, it will actually do a very, very good job. There's large language model that it uses in the back end, like ChatGPT. It's very amazing. So I can see AI being used to test performance requirements, whether a certain proposal is actually performance, because unless you see this every day, if you're not a seasoned engineer, someone that's been writing code for quite a bit, and something comes to you, it's very hard to tell if it's actually performance or not. So I think AI in that aspect can help.
Yeah, AI hasn't affected us a lot yet. In 3 to 5 years, it will change the landscape of how it's done. I just don't know exactly what that looks like yet. It'll make some changes to what we do on a day-to-day basis. It could change how the contractor does their work, etc. But I don't know what that looks like yet. To answer your second question about most of our designs that we do can be done by almost any contractor of a normal size that can handle a tall building. Except for with a handful of a few times we use some little widgets, gadgets that are unique Some contractors don't like to deal with that risk because they don't know it, because they haven't seen it. But the vast majority of performance-based site designs that gets done can be done by most contractors. So that's not the impediment, by and large.
I'm Ellen Thorpe. I work for the Coalition for Sustainable Roofing. I've worked in roofing and codes and standards development for 15 years. When I first heard about the new performance standard, I cried because I thought,
In a good way or a bad way?
oh my God, now this is one more thing to keep up with.
Oh.
And I would say that my colleagues, and we all work for trade associations, felt similarly. But after talking with Dom a couple days ago and hearing you today, I'm really excited about
You're gonna race it, aren't you?
I am really excited about performance-based standards. I think that it has the potential to drive innovation. I think that it has a great potential to reduce the influence of special interests at the code hearings and in the standards. But I'm also wondering, what would you all say to my colleagues? Because we're all going to be at ASHRAE on Saturday morning at 8 a.m. What would you like the messaging to be for folks like me who, I mean, embarrassingly, I just thought this is going to be one more thing to keep track of. Because I don't have a staff of 20 like some of the big trade associations do, but I think I am on the performance codes bandwagon now. I think I'm on it.
Welcome aboard.
Good, Scott.
You know, I think that the big thing is they're going to and like it, because now it gives them alternatives of what to do. And like you say, as they're going out and inventing products that are becoming more, now they have a way to better promote that. And I think as we start to see, you know, some of the natural disasters we have, and as you're, you know, making that to withstand it, it's going to be great, because instead of, you know, maybe some things that aren't kept up to date with the code and the development, now you have another avenue to promote that. So
And faster.
and faster.
And faster, that's the key, faster.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be at ASHRAE too, so I'll see you there. I'm actually flying out there tomorrow morning. I'm on various ASHRAE committees, 62.1, 62.2, 15, 400. So
90.1, 189.
yes.
Okay, stop.
Come on, let's go. Let's go.
1, 2, 3. So through my participation in those standards development activities, I always recommend performance requirements. In our codes, the Uniform Plumbing Code, Uniform Mechanical Code, we always recommend performance requirements. So thank you for jumping on the bandwagon. We're definitely going
I
to
think I'm on it.
Other questions?
Quick
Yes.
question. I was interested in this whole idea of functional recovery that you were talking about.
Yeah.
And you mentioned a hospital as an example that would have you back online in 3 days.
Well, no, not 3 days.
Okay.
Within a day.
Within a day.
Oh, yeah.
But what other occupancies are using functional recovery as an objective?
It's been around. I've done a handful of hospitals that actually use that technology.
Mhm.
They happen to be all in Canada, by the way, and that was a target. But it's just, even though functional recovery, that information's been around for a long time, we finally have the technical tools to actually interrogate, if we change the design, what's the outcome about how much downtime we might have to get back to functional recovery. We have the technology to do that. And so, obviously hospitals and other essential facilities would be in the highest category, because we need them back online now.
Sure.
And then if you go all the way down to, we talked about earlier in the other session, the shed at the golf course, we don't care.
Right.
That's an E.
Multifamily, single family?
And that will be slotted on the table. But at the end of the day, the jurisdiction should make that decision for themselves. They should know what's important to them. Maybe that bowling alley is really important to them, because the gods of bowling are curling, right? Curling. So they can assign it, but we give recommendations of what kind of occupancy should be slotted in from A, the highest, to E. We don't care about it because it's a shed at the golf course.
Okay.
Yeah, but we don't want to assign it for them. We want the jurisdiction to make that decision.
And I guess with that too might also be the owner, like I was seeing.
Oh, yeah, the owner, yes.
For the energy storage systems, they can't be down for less than, what, 10 seconds?
The owner always has first say.
So that's the quick follow-up on the functional recovery. I'm not a buildings guy. This is Eric Barada Nibs, Director of Infrastructure Programs and Services, more like heavy civil side. So, like, I'm just trying to imagine what you need to get a hospital back online in one day. Because I imagine, like, I was working associated with OBO at one point in time abroad, and we got to send structural engineers to go inspect the building. Like, it's not the designer's fault if they can't get the people there at the appropriate time. So is it installing sensors to be able to identify that after an earthquake there wasn't any shifting, or this is, I'm not from this area, so sorry if it's an ignorant question, but.
No, it's not. For hospitals, we don't want them to be
It's a
down.
good question, actually.
We don't want them down at all, right? They should be able to be doing what they do, because if you're in surgery, stop the surgery for that 35 seconds of shaking, obviously, but we want them back online all right away. So that's the case, and so you've done all the homework on the design side. You've constructed it appropriately, which is really, really, really important. You have to build what is designed. Not just the structure, we're talking about the stuff above you. Those lights above your head, I never stood underneath a light for a reason, okay? Because if it falls hit your head, you can be hurt. So we talk about all that, that's really important. If the infrastructure around a hospital goes down, which is possible, they're geared at least for 72 hours and sometimes 96 hours or longer to be self-sustainable for both water, sewer, oxygen, all the things they need, and power, so they can be self-sustainable until hopefully the rest of the community can bring services back up to them.
So the assumption is that the building is still standing?
Oh, yeah, absolutely standing, and so is all the ceiling tiles and the ductwork and the piping and everything else is good to go.
Well, I want to thank the panel today. I want to thank you for your participation. Let's give them a round of applause.
And for Dominic, hold the time, and for Dominic for
Oh,
doing a great job.
No.
Yeah.
You're doing a great job.
Thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the conference.